Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Dairy's issue class on November 2012. Today is not only Stewardship Sunday here at church, but yesterday we celebrated Veterans Day, and I want to put a shout out there to all the veterans that are here in class and that are watching. Thank you to all for your service. Today we have a National Donor Organ Sunday, a donation. The concept behind National Donor Sabbath Sunday is to unite different people of different religions while learning how to save a life by donating vital organs to those in need. We all know the importance of organ donations. Without those who donated organs, we collectively here, 4 of us from our church, who are going to share our stories with you, may not be available to share them at this time. Today at Dairy, we have at least 4 people, maybe more in our congregation, who know the importance of organ donation. Pastor Stephen, who was a bone marrow donor back in 2015, knows the importance of donation. Carl Rohr, who is our heart recipient, he is 26 years post. Dan, our organist, who we all know, is working on 3-year post kidney transplant. And me, I have had 2 lung transplants in the last 10 years. We all know that without them, we may not be here to provide our stories to you. The 4 of us are going to share them now. We're going to start with Pastor Stephen with his testimony, followed by Dan, who is joining us by Zoom, and then Carl, and then myself. So welcome, Pastor Stephen.
Thank you. So at my previous church, we had a woman, a young mother, who ended up having a blood cancer and needing a stem cell transplant. And after she had that transplant, was doing better, another one of our longtime members, who is a guy named Mike, just one of those go-get-em people who did everything all the time. He ended up needing a stem cell transplant. So we decided we were going to have a stem cell kind of donor drive. So one Sunday after worship, we had as many people who were eligible to come in, and we had a Be the Match there, which is kind of the National Bone Marrow Donor Registry, come, and they had swabs, and all you have to do is swab your cheek, put it in, you mail it off. And you're part of the registry. That's all it takes. We could do that here sometime really easily. You just swab your cheek, and off it goes. So usually people are on the registry for years and years, never get a call. You just get emails saying, thank you, and give us some money, or renew your commitment, that kind of stuff. But I ended up getting a call like a year later that I was a potential match for somebody in need of a bone marrow donation. And because of a lot of legal things, they couldn't tell me much. He just wasn't in the country. I knew he was between 30 and 50 years old and would need this stem cell transplant. So what happens is they find the 10 best matches. And then if you're willing, if you're one of the 10 best matches, you go in for further blood testing, because they want to test some other things to make sure you're a really good match, the absolute best of the 10. So I'm like, well, if I'm the top 10, I better be number 1, gosh darn it. So I go in and get my extra blood testing, and about 2 months after that, I get the call that says, you are number 1. You're the best match for this person. Would you still be willing to donate? And they go through a lot of things. So there's 2 major types of bone marrow donation. There's the kind of takes just stem cells from your blood. They give you some shots for a series of weeks, and then you go into this double pheresis machine, and they just take out your blood, take out all the good stem cells you've created extra of from this medicine, put your blood back in you. In some ways, that's the easier kind. There's no surgery. You just have to take a shot, a bunch, and they can give you flu-like symptoms. The other way is they get a big needle and stick it into your hip and suck out the bone marrow. I did that one. So I said, sure, they gotta go through the risks and everything. And this, with the organization Be the Match, they help provide all the different situations. I was in Peoria, Illinois at the time, so the closest place that did this bone marrow transplant was the University of Iowa hospital system. So in order to do it, we had just had my daughter Verity, so I'd be out of town for a few days and then out of commission because you're not supposed to like lift anything real heavy. So Be the Match actually paid for my mother-in-law to fly up and be with Courtney and help with the new child while I went to Iowa. I had a friend drive me over. Before that, I had to go through more testing to make sure I'm decently healthy and everything to give bone marrow. Now, every country has different rules about what you can find out about your recipient. Like in the U.S., after like 2 or 3 years, the recipient can get your information if you want to. You can kind of find out some general stuff. I never did find out what country this person was from. And I even tried to find out even later, hey, is this person still alive? Never could, which is always frustrating because they always said they could at least get that information. Because you kind of want to know, did this work? You learn interesting things like when your bone marrow is transplanted to somebody else, they basically get your immune system. So if you're allergic to something, guess what? They're probably going to be allergic to it now. So it's kind of interesting things. But the day of, you go and they get you to sleep, you fall asleep, you wake up, they've taken out your bone marrow. It's actually pretty easy. It's not a lot of pain. They gave me a narcotic afterwards. That made me sick, so stop taking those. Just Tylenol. And it was pretty easy. The best thing about bone marrow donation, though, is they tell you you need to take naps. It's medically mandated because you're worn out. It kind of sucks life out of you. So, Verity was only a few months old, hadn't had any good sleep for a while, so I was medically mandated to take naps and rest. So that was pretty great. I'd be willing to donate some more bone marrow for a week of good naps at this point. But yeah, it was actually relatively easy. I stayed one night in Iowa, not at the hospital, just at a hotel. They wanted just you to be there in case there were any issues overnight. You get right back to the hospital, but there weren't any. It was all relatively easy. In some ways, I found the surgery easier than having to go in for shots and having to sit there for a few hours, because you have to be awake for a few hours as you do the pheresis. The great thing about surgery is you're asleep during it. You don't know how long it takes. So it was all actually relatively easy. I do wish I had known, more about the person. The people in my former church that had the stem cell transplant, each of them eventually was able to connect with the person who donated the bone marrow and meet them and talk with them. That was really meaningful for them, and it saved their lives. They were so well known in the church. So many people did that bone marrow drive. When I had left that church, no one else had been a match for anybody yet. Maybe at this point. You're allowed to give twice. Then they won't let you do it again. I was called 2 years ago, again, because I was a match for somebody. And I was going to wait for the next process to do more of the testing. But then, for whatever reason, that person was no longer a candidate for a bone marrow transplant. Either things got better or things got worse. But they only let you do it twice. So when I did agree to go through it again, I did ask the question, if for some reason someone in my family needed it, would doctors still do it? They're like, yeah, you can still do it for your family. They just don't want to do it more than twice because there hasn't been a lot of testing on taking it out more than twice. They'd rather just not push the envelope. The chances of anybody matching with somebody more than twice anyway are pretty astronomical, but even getting matched twice is a pretty rare occurrence. I just have really common bone marrow, I guess. I don't know. I had that O negative blood that's a universal donor. I don't know if that means anything. So as you know, a few people have had stem cell transplants here recently. They use their own stem cells, the Scott Morrow and Bill DeMuth. So as you go through that, you're kind of wiping away your immune system for a bit until it builds back up, which is why it's so important for kind of Bill to stay away from people when he had the fever last week going in to the hospital. But stem cell transplants are the basic main cure for a lot of different cancers, whether it's blood cancers like leukemia or myeloma. So Be the Match is the main foundation that you can give bone marrow for. For those on the Health and Wellness Committee, I need to talk to Becky, but I'd love to have a bone marrow drive here someday, because it's so easy. It's a lot easier than a blood drive. You just go, you get swabbed, they send it off, you're in the database. You'll probably never get called, but maybe you will get called. And it's an opportunity to know something you have that you were given, that you didn't earn, can save someone else's life at very little cost to you. And so somebody asks, why would you give to a complete stranger? You're never going to meet, you're never going to know. And it's like, why not? I can. And because I can give, I want to give. And I would hope if my daughter, myself, or somebody else I love needed it, somebody else who has the opportunity to give would be willing and want to give. I think that's a good idea for Stewardship Sunday in general. We all have so much. And what we can give can save a life, transform a life, make a difference. And so I was honored to be able to make that gift to someone, and I hope and pray, I often think about whoever it was, I hope and pray that they're alive, and that they're happy, and living their best life with whatever allergies I happen to have, to like fall stuff. Hopefully there's not too much of that around where they live, or around that part, but I hope they are happy and healthy, and it was a privilege to get to give that gift of life. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have our organist, Dan, who was somewhere out in the hinterlands. So you're on.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Dan.
Good morning.
Morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, good. I have a long medical history, but before, I'm not going to go into all that, but thank you for your prayers and your cards and letters and concerns. I'm doing really, really well. My biggest pain right now is a toothache that needs to be taken care of. So I think we're doing pretty well. I will just share a brief history. I swam in a lake as a child and had what they believe is standing water typhoid. I was failure to thrive from 5 to 8 years old, and then felt better around 8 years old, and then in 2013 discovered a blood pressure of 240 over 180, and had a kidney damage, high creatinine. I started dialysis April 1st of 2014, and had a long journey of dialysis for almost 8 years. And a kidney transplant was probably the biggest blessing in my life. If you could give an organ to someone that has the least invasive surgery, it would be a kidney. In fact, Liz was back to work the next week. She felt great. She was a college friend. We sang in concert choir. I had 46 people go through testing for transplant, and that's the largest number that UPMC Harrisburg has seen for one person, and I thank God for each person who went forward. But that gives you an idea of the amount of matching that has to happen to make a successful transplant. You have to match 6 antigens, as well as blood typing and tissue typing. And Liz was a perfect match, but was too petite for someone my size. The kidney would have worked, but we actually found through the paired exchange a perfect match. And the kidney was actually too big for me. They said he must have been a linebacker. And he was probably around 18 or 19 years old. And I got my kidney on December 2nd of 2020 and was on IV fluids for 3 months because the kidney was so big for my body. I've been doing great since, other than 2 heart attacks and a bypass, but those stem from the years of dialysis. All the back pressure from the dialysis narrows the vessels of the heart. But I should be good to go. And I'm so grateful for the gift of life. When you're on dialysis, you have to take binders for phosphorus, because when your kidneys aren't functioning to filter out certain nutrients and minerals from the body, you build up phosphorus, which pulls the calcium out of your bones, out of your teeth, hence why I have some teeth issues. I have to really be up on my dental work quite often. And some people, they even develop what they call calciphylaxis, where the potassium and the calcium settle in the heart and the bones, and the tissue actually goes gangrenous. And so you have to be up on all your binders with every meal. Your potassium goes too high because you don't have a kidney to filter it out, and dialysis can only take up so much potassium. Plus you're tired all the time, you're completely drained. There are two types of dialysis. I did both. There's peritoneal dialysis, which you can do at home through osmosis. There's glucose that goes into your peritoneal lining, and it pulls the toxins out of the body. There's also hemodialysis, where you clean the blood. And I had my kidneys removed on Valentine's Day of 2020, so I broke up with my kidneys that day. And I had no kidneys for about 6 months, and about 8 months really. And that was really tough. Once they took my kidneys out, I had to go on hemodialysis, and that really, really drains you. And you can only do dialysis for so long. The blood vessels in the body eventually have enough. And so the gift of life of a kidney really is life-changing. You have energy. You can do all the things you want to do. You take a handful of pills in the morning, a handful of pills at night, and that's it. You don't have to go to a center or hook up to a machine at nighttime. And Liz is doing great. She's actually been a surrogate mother for someone else already. So she's giving life more than anyone I know. And she's 35 and she's doing great. And my kidney is fantastic even through all the surgery. My creatinine is still 0.89, which is exceedingly healthy. It's a very healthy kidney. And I just thank God for his looking over me every day. And whatever comes along, I read my Psalm 34 and I just thank the Lord for good health. That's all I have to really share. There are at the moment 106 people, 106,000 people on the National Kidney Register. There are 90,000 at the moment. What was that?
106,000 waiting for a transplant.
Waiting for transplant. And
2,000 waiting for a kidney.
this is why I have Sarah in my life. And this is Sarah. So there's a lot of people that need kidneys. Anyone can donate below the age of 62. That's kind of the cutoff for most transplants. So if you have younger family members and people that are very healthy, if they've ever expressed any interest for giving a kidney, give them my phone number. I'd love to talk to them and share my story. That's all I have. It's a gift of life.
Thanks, Dan, for what you had to say. Next, we have Carl, who is our heart transplant recipient of 26 years post-recovery.
Yes, I'm too old to transplant.
I think this is working now. Does it seem to be working?
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyway, so as Jim said, I'm a heart transplant recipient. Most of you probably already knew that, but it's true. I am a heart transplant recipient, and I'm not a great storyteller, at least verbally, but I think that pictures tell a great story. So I brought my picture book with me, and first thing I would like to do is just acknowledge my donor family. Here's some pictures of my donor family, including my donor. So if you think about it, you don't have to think about it too long. Without a donor family, none of us would really be here. So that's the most important part of my story, is thanking my donor family. And I also want to just get this out of the way. I have a really strong connection with Ohio State University. No offense to Penn State. I'm a Penn State graduate. In 1998, I competed at the first transplant games that I was part of, and that was held at OSU. And I got to compete in the stadium, Buckeye Stadium, on the track. And that was way before it was an open end, it was a horseshoe. And so I have that strong connection with OSU. And even my house is colored the same colors as Ohio State University. So I'm not going to change that. But that was in 1998 in the summer, and that was less than a year after I had my transplant, which was in August of 1997. I would like to say that this is a journey that you don't go through alone. There's a lot of different people attached to it. And my adopted brother Tom is here, who was part of this journey with me, and my adopted donor mom Cheryl is here as well, who is also part of this journey with me. Yes, I did get to meet my donor family about 3 years after my transplant. I didn't really know how that whole process worked with, reaching out to your donor family, but I did write and they wrote, and the lines got crossed. We never connected like the way we were supposed to. You have to be careful what you say, and your letters are screened and they go through if you don't say the wrong things. Well, my donor family had been really trying to get a hold of me because they really wanted to know where their son's heart went. And unbeknownst to me, they, I think were revealing too much information, so the Delaware Valley Transplant Program screened it out and I never knew. And then one night I was at home and I got a phone call, and it turns out it was my donor family. They had connected somehow with me and called me at home and said, "We really, really want to meet you." And I was kind of floored by that. I knew that's not the way it was really supposed to happen, but I was happy that they did contact me. And I know how it evolved. I know the process, how they eventually found out my phone number. So I agreed to come down and see them at their home, which was in another state. It was outside we call it an OPO. It was outside our OPO, but I said I would like to come down and meet you at your home, and it was right around Christmas time or New Year's. And I was able to go down there and meet them, and I met the whole family. I met everybody. And it was like Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's in one day, all wrapped up together. It was pretty incredible. They've been the most gracious people, treated me like I was their son from day one, the day I met them, and of course they were thrilled to see that I was doing really well. And I spent that one day with them. I gave them a little Christmas ornament I made with my dad at a stained glass shop, and they put it on their tree right away. And we celebrated with all kinds of home-cooked foods. I had to say no thank you to the homemade liquor that was in the kitchen at the time. But tempting, but I had to say no thank you. And then my donor mom and I spent some time together that day. She introduced me to the people down at the neighborhood bar, her friends down there at the bar. She had the entire family come over to meet me. The last person that I met as part of the family was my donor's wife, Christina. And it was a very special time. I connected very well with my donor family, and we kept in touch. We've kept in touch for the past 25 years. So that's a pretty special thing. Sometimes people ask, do you think you gained any personal traits, or do you have any personal traits that you share in common with your donor? I do. There's things we have in common. He was a chef. He worked at a restaurant with his wife, and he had gone to special school to become a chef, and he was the first college-educated child in the family. And just the fact that he and his wife worked together in that restaurant was special to me. And also we share some of the same loves, fishing, cooking, eating. I love food. I like cooking. I like to eat well, and I gained a new appreciation for food when I was recovering. I had to learn how to control my diet all over again, and that was a big thing for me. I was actually scared that if I didn't eat right, I would get sick again, and that I would not be living up to the expectations I had for myself to do as well as I possibly could. So I connected in that way with my donor, Arthur. And I also felt like I had to honor their sacrifice, and not only that they were donors and I received a heart through Arthur, but that they were immigrants to this country. And they had started a new life here only shortly before. They had come to this country and started a brand new life here, and this was quite a traumatic experience for them to lose their eldest. So I felt a connection to live up to the expectation that I had to do the very best I could. And like I said, a lot of people helped me through this journey. I was fortunate to only have to wait in the hospital for about 2 months before I received a donor heart. And there's a lot of things that go into that equation, but for me, it was primarily a short wait because I wasn't a big person, I wasn't a little person. I was a medium-sized person in that I could accept a heart, or the doctors could accept a heart from someone that was either a little younger or a little older. I had an average size. I had a common blood type. I had no other major medical issues to deal with. And I was pretty resilient. I wasn't going to give up easily. So there were some rough times waiting. I will be the first to tell you that there were some really rough times. And my faith got me through. And I was very humble about the whole process. There's a lot of people that helped me along the way at the medical center and outside the medical center, my church family, my friends, my immediate family. I had a lot of faith and hope and resilience. So I didn't give up easily. And I also had some pretty unique experiences while I was waiting. One day, I asked one of my transplant coordinators, could you please take me down to SICU? I want to see what SICU looks like. Because I figured I was going to get there sooner or later. She took me down in SICU in a wheelchair, and I got to meet the people down in the surgical intensive care unit. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, that's where I was, in SICU recovering. I also got by in the hospital by sneaking food in. With their friends and my nurses. They used to get me stuff that I really wanted badly. And at nighttime, I would go into the closet and I would take this food out, and nobody would see me. Because I could eat some of my favorite foods. And I was always hungry. I was asking for food. I was really, really high anxiety too, and even the anxiety medications that they gave me didn't really help me very much. So I'd end up staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning, watching baseball or whatever, and then I would be woken up at 5:30 in the morning by the phlebotomist ready to take blood from me,
And the
and
exercise.
and everything else. But 5:30 routinely, they were the first people there. And it was always kind of a joy to see somebody come to my room that early. And they were always really good to me, but I ended up getting lots of bruises and vital hurts. And then I would finally catch a shut-eye for an hour, and then at 6:30 or so, the doctors would come in, and it was usually an entourage. A lot of people coming in together, my doctors, nurses, residents, interns, med students, the whole 9 yards. And because it was a teaching hospital, I was like a student for them, so it was pretty cool in that respect. Got to meet a lot of people, great nurses. All the nurses that were there to help me were wonderful, and they're there for you around the clock. So when things would go bad in the middle of the night, they were there to help me. And then August 17th, 1997 is when the call came, and I remember distinctly in the OR on the table, ready to go, and the phone rang, and the next thing I had the mask on, and it was a go. And then the next thing I remember was waking up in SICU, but I was pretty much paralyzed. I couldn't do anything. But the people in SICU were so good. They wouldn't let you lie there. They had to get you off the table, off the bed, on your feet, and moving as soon as they could, because they wanted you to be up and about. And they wanted you to be able to get out of SICU as soon as possible and get back on the floor. And another thing I did that probably was bad in hindsight was I really wanted to get out of the hospital badly after my week and a half, 10 days. And I actually pushed and got let out a day early, much to the chagrin of my transplant coordinators. But I got out a day early, and they wanted to make sure that I was good to go and understood how to take my meds. And that was the thing that was really important. I had to understand how to take my meds and take care of myself. I will give great credit to everybody that watched over me and kept me on my toes for the first 6 months, 2 years, 10 years, until I was allowed to basically have no more biopsies. I had biopsies for the first 10 years. After 10 years, it was my choice. I said, no thanks, I don't want any more biopsies. I've never had a bad experience with rejection. God, thank you for that. But I take pretty good care of myself, and I'm pretty cautious about the things I do, especially being around people that are ill. I'm pretty cautious about that. And like I said, if it weren't for the people that came to visit me, like my adopted brother Tom, who came religiously to visit me in my hospital room, and my adopted donor mom, Cheryl, who I didn't meet until after the fact when I learned about her story, and we crossed paths through Delaware Valley Transplant Program. That it really became, the whole story sort of became whole for me, because not only was my donor family in the picture, but I was meeting other people who had gone through similar experiences, who had stories to tell, and the fact that our stories crossed paths so closely meant quite a bit to me, and I could feel firsthand what it was like to be in someone else's place, to have lost a family member, and how much of an experience their family shared with me, and that organ donation is a special thing. And I would say that God is good always, life is good. I didn't always believe that, but life is good. And I would say to anyone, you have to go out there every day and live life to your fullest and give it your best shot. Always, I live like today's the last day of my life. I want to go out and do the very best I can, and hopefully that will be shared with the other people I meet on my journey. Cheryl, would you like to say anything about your part of this process, and how our paths crossed, and how we got to meet one another?
I can.
Okay. And every picture tells a story, so I have my picture book, and it tells more of the story.
Cheryl.
Do I need that? I can be pretty loud. I had 3 boys growing up. I can be pretty loud. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my name's Cheryl Eschenauer. I live here in Hershey. 27 years ago, 26 years ago, almost 27 years ago, my youngest of 3 sons was involved in a terrible bicycle accident here in Hershey. He was 12 years old. My husband and I knew where he was going to be at. He was with one of his brothers. We knew the route that they were going to be on. We knew how long it would take them. We had given them a cell phone, and you have to remember 26 years ago, cell phones really weren't as prevalent as they are right now. But we gave them this cell phone thinking that if they had a flat tire, if they popped their chain, they would be able to be in contact with us. So 20 minutes after the boys left the house telephone line rang, and I answered it, and it was my son Matthew, and he was rather hysterical. He was 14 at the time, and he had told me that there was an accident that his brother was involved in, and I asked him, "Where are you?" And he was that upset he couldn't exactly tell me where they were. I said, "Look around and tell me if there's a house that you recognize," and there was. So I said to him, "Stay with your brother, your dad and I are on our way." Never once did I expect to see what was happening to Jonathan when I arrived at the accident scene. I thought that perhaps he had fallen off of his bike and had gotten a broken bone, maybe a broken leg, a broken arm. But my husband went the way that the boys would have been coming home in his vehicle. I went the way the boys left our house. We both came upon the accident at about the same time. My husband happened to be following the Pediatric Advanced Life Support Unit. The way that I went, I was not following any emergency vehicles, but when I came upon the accident scene, I could tell it was so much worse than anything we had ever imagined. He was being given CPR, not by the EMTs, but by some nurses who happened to pass the accident right after it happened. So those nurses were giving him CPR until the emergency staff arrived, and once the emergency staff arrived, they took over. There really was no response from Jonathan at the accident. So the accident occurred about 3 miles from the medical center. He was taken to the medical center. We were met at the door of the hospital by a chaplain. And as soon as I saw that, I just had a sense that this was not a good situation. So my husband and I were escorted into a small trauma room, and Jonathan was in the trauma center for a period of time, and it was 4 hours that he was being worked on. During that 4 hours, a gentleman came up to us and introduced himself as a physician on staff. Did not know me or my husband at the time, but knew of our family through our boys and his children. And he was able to serve as kind of a liaison back and forth between the trauma room and the small waiting room that we were in. So after 4 hours, the doctors came to us and explained the injuries that had occurred to John. He had some broken bones, he had a broken leg, he had some broken facial bones, but we were told that those bones were not life-threatening. We were told the most serious injury that he had received was a closed internal head injury, and that he would be closely monitored throughout the night, but there was only a 1% chance of survival as we knew it. So he was taken to the pediatric intensive care unit. My husband and I and our family members were permitted to be at his bedside round the clock. We were able to see what was being done to him every minute, every hour throughout that period of time. He was in traction for the broken leg. Again, there was no response from him at all. But we saw what was being done in an attempt to save his life. So it was the following morning that the medical staff came to us and asked if we had ever considered organ and tissue donation. The feeling was that due to the results of the tests that were performed on him throughout the night, he was being taken for one additional test but the feeling was that there was no brain activity and he would be declared brain dead. And not everyone meets the criteria to become an organ donor. Typically, to be an organ donor, you have to have some type of traumatic brain injury. If you suffer a cardiac death, you're not able to be an organ donor. So there are very few people that meet that criteria. My husband and I agreed to meet with someone from at the time it was the Delaware Valley Transplant Program that Carl spoke about. They have now changed their name to Gift of Life Donor Program. And we agreed to meet with a transplant coordinator. We met with that individual. Our family was with us. Our pastor was with us. We were able to ask any questions that we had, and that transplant coordinator explained organ donation to us in detail. Never once gave us the opinion that any of our questions were not important. Told us that it was our decision to make, and whatever decision we made, that was the right decision for us. So we were permitted to go back to Jonathan's bedside, and to be very honest with you, when Carl was talking and he talked about donor families and his appreciation for donor families, and some people have asked, why would you agree to donate your son's organs? My son was 12 years old. And our answer was, why would we not? If my son had an injury to his body that could have been an organ that, if it was transplanted into him, would have saved his life, I would have given my life for that. But with the realization that that wasn't going to happen, we wanted to help another family or families in their time of need. So we agreed to donate Jonathan's organs. We did not donate tissues, but we agreed to donate Jonathan's organs. We signed the consent forms. It's a long period of time from the time that you sign those consent forms until a match is made. It goes to a national registry. Through that national registry, there are individuals that are rated as far as severity of need. It was talked about blood type and tissue type. It takes a long time for that to happen. We stayed at Jonathan's bedside that entire time. We didn't leave him. I wasn't going to leave him. Where would I go? So it was about 9 hours after we signed the consent form that we were told that there had been matches. And after we signed the forms, the transplant coordinator said to us, well, you can leave. And I was rather hysterical, and I remember saying, where do you think I would go? I'm not going anywhere until, number one, I know that he's gone for surgery. Number two, I know what organs have been able to be used for transplant. And number three, I'm not leaving until I know that the funeral director has his body. I'm not leaving. And they honored that. They honored that. My other two sons, this is 26 years ago, but still very difficult. They said their goodbyes to their brother. My husband and I stayed with him. And when it was time for surgery, my husband and I walked at the head of his bed with him. And we walked with him to the operating area. When they took Jonathan into an operating room, my husband and I were shuttled right across the hallway into a waiting room, and we waited until we knew that the surgery had been completed and what organs were used for transplant. As a result of the accident, both of his lungs were unfortunately injured, so they were not able to transplant his lungs. But his heart, both kidneys, his pancreas, and his liver. So 5 of his organs went to 4 others, all adults. Jonathan was 12, and I wasn't upset at that, but I was somewhat surprised that the organs from a 12-year-old would go to an adult. But as Carl mentioned, and it was explained to us, they allocate these organs all based on size. Jonathan was 116 pounds, so his organs were sized so that they could go into an adult. We left the hospital with only a business card from the transplant coordinator, period. Wasn't happy about that. I mean, it was hurtful because we were told that we wouldn't hear anything for probably 2 to 4 weeks. And at the time we would hear, we would just have some brief information on the recipients. So we went home, and the next morning I was rather hysterical, and I called the transplant program. I had the phone number and the name of our transplant coordinator. It was a female. And I said, I need to talk to this person. And I told them why I needed to. I didn't need to know who these people were, but I needed to know if they survived surgery. I needed to know that our gift to someone was a gift that another individual was able to receive. The poor man on the opposite end of the phone, I think he thought, who is this crazy lady? Because I was pretty adamant that I need to talk to somebody, and you need this. I mean, you need to get in contact with this person. Well, I'm sorry, but she's not in the office. Well, then you need to track her down, because I need to know. This is my 12-year-old son I'm talking about. Within 2 hours, she called me. And she told me that all 5 of his organs were able to be transplanted. It was mentioned that you don't know a lot about the donor family. Likewise, we didn't know a lot about the recipients. All we knew was that his heart had been flown out to Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia. We knew that 1 kidney went to a Philadelphia area hospital. We knew that his 2nd kidney and his pancreas stayed locally and went to a gentleman. And then we knew that his liver was transported to a Philadelphia area hospital. After the fact, it was very important for me to write letters to each of these individuals, because I wanted them to know a little bit about my son. They didn't need to know where we lived, and they didn't need to know what my name was, but I wanted them to know that he was a happy, healthy little boy. And unfortunately, he had a terrible accident. And just so you all know, yes, he had a helmet on his head, and that Trek helmet was still on his head when the emergency personnel arrived at the accident scene. They had to take, the ambulance personnel had to take that helmet off of his head. My boys were not boys that just got on a bicycle and went for a joyride. They would ride bike every week with their father, 20, 30 miles. They knew how to ride. This was unfortunate that this happened. So within a month after the accident occurred, I wrote a letter to each of the 4 individuals, and Carl mentioned how difficult it is to get letters through, and it is. The letters that I wrote, we were not allowed to say where we were from. We were not allowed to give names. We were not allowed to let them know what hospital he was transplanted, or he was taken to and his organs were removed from. But I wanted them to know that he was the youngest of 3 boys. I wanted them to know that he was a middle school student. I wanted them to know some of his likes and dislikes. So in our case, what we had to do is we send the letters to the transplant program. They have a bereavement counselor that reads those letters and crosses out any identifiable information. And then the letter then is sent to the transplant hospital, and a transplant coordinator at that hospital makes a determination if the recipient is able to receive it or not. Long and short of it is, 26 years later, we've met the family of the liver recipient. The kidney pancreas recipient was from Lancaster County. He was a Mennonite man, and he was a cabinet maker. Kind of ironic, because my son made the comment that he thought that maybe he wanted to be a carpenter. Do you know what you want to do at 12 years old? Well, I guess he thought he did. That gentleman made jewelry chests for each of my granddaughters, and like I want to call it like a jewelry item that he has on a chest of drawers for my grandson. And the heart recipient is still living and doing very well. The heart recipient is from Tioga County. My sons and I, my husband has since passed, but my sons and I have met the heart recipient. We have spent time with him, most recently in October. We were at his home in August, and it's been a great experience. There are people that I know that I would have never known otherwise. And I know my time is up, but I will tell you this. I never said why me and why our family, but I have said I will understand this better when my time on this earth is up. I'll understand why it happened. So thank you very much for having me. Carl, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Cheryl. You know, if you look at this, we all have a story to tell. Whether it's Dan and his kidneys, Stephen and his donation of his marrow, and the recipient being Carl, who has been blessed for 26 years, and even myself, who has been blessed for the past 10 years. You know, many of you know that I've had 2 lung transplants in that period of time. I've had a single lung transplant back in 2013, and more recently I had a second single lung transplant on my right lung in 2021. My story begins back in 2009, and I've been on this journey a long time too. And back then, we were invited to go hiking in Colorado. And at that period of time, well, it still is, as you know, there's nothing flat in Colorado. The air is thin, and during this period of time, whenever we were hiking, I had trouble keeping up with my group of people and friends. And my sister and her husband and the Alexanders and a couple of other people were there. And we walked the hills, or the mountains, I guess they're called out there. And they would hike, and they would get to reach the top or the summit of these hills. Very few times did I ever see what was out over the horizon, because I was lagging behind and could not in no way keep up with them. In 2010, or in late 2009 or 2009, I'll get it right yet. When we came back from this trip, I went to see my primary care physician about my problem, and I knew I had one. And I always put it to, I was getting older, just like many of us, and I was probably a little bit overweight at the time. I got to the PCP, and he was the first person to admit that he didn't know what was going on. He said, either I have a heart problem or it's a pulmonary issue. Well, a heart problem would have been a whole lot easier to fix, I believe, than what I went through with my lungs. And he got me into an appointment over at the Med Center. And at that time, I was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, idiopathic in nature. Idiopathic means there's no known cause of why it is done. It affects the lungs, and the fibrosis means that I'm having a lot of fluid and scarring building up around my lungs in this case. You know, I said to the doctor, I said, well, let's fix it. You know, move on. And she sort of shook her head and said, no, that's not the way it works. She said, you have a disease that there's no known reason why you have it, and more importantly, there's no cure for it at this time. Well, that sort of put a damper on Karen and my day, you know, coming out of the hospital with knowing that you have a disease you've never heard of and there's no cure for, and that you may have 3 to 5 years to live. And that was the diagnosis that I had. The disease pulmonary fibrosis is progressive, and there's no way of stopping it back in 2010. I did all the appointments, saw a doctor, saw more doctors than what I wanted to see at that time, because I've never been in the hospital up until this time. I've never really seen doctors at this time because I was pretty healthy. But, you know, no magic pill for this disease. You know, and I was introduced to Temple University Hospital back in 2010, and that's where I've been ever since. I've had the same transplant team, the same doctors ever since, which is sort of unusual, that I can see the same doctor, and a real doctor too. No offense meant to anybody who is an intern or going through the medical practice. I went through all the tests, and the tests are too numerous, and Carl knows what tests are, that they're too numerous to name, because when they're done with going over your body, you know more about what's inside of you than what you ever thought possible, and what was wrong. They do this because they want to make sure that the patient is sick enough to warrant a transplant, and they want to make sure that the individual is going to be able to survive. In 2013, up until June of that year, when I was listed for transplant, the doctor said, it may take a while because my lung allocation score, which puts me on a list with hundreds of other people, was low, and it may take a while for me to receive the lung that I need. Well, in September of that year, we got a call on a bright sunny morning, Sunday morning, not unlike what's outside now in September. It was a tad bit warmer than what it is today, but it was still a bright, beautiful day. Karen took the call, and from Temple's telling us that we need to get there as quickly and as safely as possible. Karen and I had our moment in the kitchen together at that time. We held each other, we said a prayer together, not only for me, but for the donor family that gave permission to have that organ donated. I knew what had to happen in order to get that lung, that someone had to pass on. I mean, not for me, but I was just at the right place at the right time. That was September 22nd of 2013. We left at 7:15 or shortly after that when we got the call. We stopped to pick up my sister that day, which probably annoyed her because she was retired and it was probably the earliest she's ever been out of bed from that period of time. We drove. I drove to the hospital. I made my calls to our 4 kids because that was important for them to know what was happening. So, at that point in time, on that Sunday morning, and we talk about how faith plays into this. We've all talked about it. I was on the prayer list over here at Derry before I was even at the hospital. Our granddaughter came to church, and at the time, talked to
Eli.
to Eli, who passed it on to Reverend Allison. And I was on the prayer list here, and I was also on the prayer list at 2 other churches before I even had the transplant, which is great, and God works in mysterious ways. I was wheeled down the hall. We were at the hospital by 10 o'clock that morning. I had to go, of course, sign more papers, and get ready for the surgery. By 11 o'clock, they were wheeling me down the hallway into the OR. And the last thing that I saw was Karen standing in the hallway, and I staring back at her, which was probably the most difficult part of this whole process, not knowing what was going to happen. Well, I woke up in ICU, and the first smiling face I saw was Karen. No nurses, Karen, but which was a great thing. I was in and out of the hospital after a single lung transplant in 8 days, so which was pretty good. I probably could have been out 2 days earlier, but as you know, in the hospitals, medical centers don't normally work on weekends, where they're going to allow you to leave. I was released and came home at that period of time. My recovery was great. Out of the hospital in 8 days, like I said, and at the time, we were expecting to be there for 3 to 5 weeks back in 2013. So either I was a good patient or they just knew I would be pitching a fit. I got to sign 2 minutes. The big thing is, I was released in 2000 on the 30th of the month. Everything was going great from that period of time up until July of 2021. I had bumps in the road, don't get me wrong, but I also I was on the golf course, and my golf game is not great, but I couldn't finish a round. I had to quit that round and I struggled to get home. Called my team and got an appointment. And after tests from being so far out of breath, I was diagnosed with chronic rejection. And chronic rejection is not a good thing, because I knew what was going to have to happen here also. And again, no real medicine to take care of it. I was diagnosed with bronchiectasis obliterans, so which means my airways were starting to scar and fill up just like my lungs did. Treatment, listed for transplant, retransplanted from my right lung back in August of 2021, which was 2 years old. I have 2 different lungs from 2 different donors doing my breathing for me in my body, which, you know, it's not unheard of, but there aren't many of us walking around with that case. I'm as healthy as anybody is with two different lungs in my body at this time. All I can say is organ donation is great, and if you're not an organ donor, it's easy to sign up. Without an organ donation,